Do I need to use the mic?
Yes, sir.
Hello, okay. As tradition, I'll do the Naruto case line. I hope you love it, Haikal. Okay. Okay, one second. Okay. Naruto's pursuit to being Hokage was not because being a Hokage is so great. Naruto believed that being Hokage is what was meant for him. Few things I'll do within my speech. The first thing that we need to caveat across the bench is that life is indifferent and cruel. That the realities that we will face will always be nothing within our control. We can't control where we were born. We can't control the communities we grew up in. We can't control just a lot of different factors within life. But what then is the meaning of pursuing Übermensch, and why necessarily this is the countervailing force to attempting to gain some control over the facets of life that you generally can. Firstly first, I'll just deal with what is the burden that opposition needs to defend. The last man is oftentimes constitutes the idea of passivity, of being inaction, to have inaction, but at its core, it's defeatist ideas and the acceptance of determinism. They constantly shouldn't fight because there's no point. It is only when you're able to fight that this matters. But there's a prerequisite logic that I'll explain here. Is to talk about what does Übermensch look like then, and why the prerequisite to pursuing Übermensch is the thing that OG will defend. That the prerequisite to this pursuit is one of the establishment of your value, establishment of what you cherish, what you love, and what you're willing to fight for. This is important because in a world where everything really doesn't matter, right? Like, go ahead, smoke, go and die, go ahead, do whatever you want. It is about identifying what gives meaning to you and how you will pursue those things. It is in this way in which you recognize that your body will always fail to the mortal coil, but the things you leave behind as an individual will always last. It is the love that you left towards your family members. It is the inspiration you gave towards your friends around you, towards the people you coach, the people that look up to you, and necessarily why this is far more meaningful as opposed to your mortal coil. That even if the world is fucked up and there's a lot of bad things, that those small things do matter and necessarily gives you that meaning. So we'll defend and we're okay to caveat that this may mean multiple different things, but we'll tell you that at the very least, even externally, this is something that's great because you're leaving an impact to other people. But secondly, let's then talk about internally. What does this pursuit actually constitute? It also constitutes to you a reason to fight for what this means. That for example, if you want to break in a majors, which you didn't break in the past, that you're willing to put in the effort to practice for it. The pursuit, even though it may be tedious, even though it may take your time and may make you feel a bit less happier because you have to spend your weekends debating at tailors. But the reality is that you oftentimes cherish those moments post those events. So it's after you went to those spas, it's after those practices, it's after the times that you spend where you're able to identify that maybe these things did give me meaning. Maybe spending time with Tanish, prepping, was great. But it's these ideals necessarily that push and transition beyond just you and maybe small meanings of debating. It's also about your minorities. It's also about women and fighting for demanding change. That you can't accept the way society is. That you can't accept determinism as the way the life should work. That comfortability and peace is the way that everything naturally is good for, right? Necessarily, it is when you enforce these ideas that changes. Because let's be real, motivation is inspiring. You look at your friends surrounding you later, you look at your friends surrounding you pursuing things that they value within their life, their belief systems, and you feel inspired by those decisions. You feel inspired and look at them like, maybe I too should put in the effort. Maybe I too should push for those things. This is important because this contagion affects groups of society. That's how people coalesce under a union. To understand that these shared beliefs is something we should fight for. That we can't stand with oppression. That we need to push back, even if it means the cost of our life. Because there's greater and deeper meaning to this. I'll take closing.
Why is the pursuit of a single shinobi like Naruto's ideals and goals more important and truthful and legitimate than other shinobi's goals like Sasuke or Obito's?
It doesn't matter. The answer is it doesn't matter. It matters to you personally. So if Tanish feels that he wants to overtake Cristiano Ronaldo in the World Cup, maybe it'll never happen, but that's something he likes. So why does it matter? The question is, it's about individual perspective and pushing towards this, and why these beliefs oftentimes, even though they may be individualistic, still share to a certain extent like this shared belief. But the second part then, let's just then deal with why, okay, so I'm moving to this, why does this matter then? It's simple, it's about living a life of no regrets. That you did what you did and it gave you some form of meaning, that you pursued it. Because the world in which Orb lives in is a constant life of regret. At the end of your life, you've lived comfortably, you lived peacefully, that's great, rainbows and butterflies. But you never did anything. You literally became nothing. You never mattered to yourself as well. You mattered only to running away from everything else. It is when you find why you matter that you answer existential questions that you always face. What is the meaning of life? The answer comes to say that you live the life of no regret. That you're sitting and wasting your time at Tedo, but it's great because it's meaningful to me. I spent a lot of fun, good times, losing motions, getting fourths. That's great. But secondly, and I'll just wrap this speech up by just pointing to you, how does this then relate to the Naruto case? It's simple. That if Naruto probably never became Hokage, and this is probably what Orb's gonna argue, like, oh, what if you can't manifest the impact? The answer is simple, that the impact is internal, that he can feel good knowing that maybe life wasn't about being Hokage, because no values do change. But secondly, it maybe is about the friends we made along the way. The clear comparative that can happen here is simple. The burden that they need to defend is why inaction is something that's necessarily good, why this resolves in existential questions like meaning of life, and why necessarily this pursuit is bad. Übermensch for life.
Thanks, Vigo, for the speech. To open up our bench, try and find a leader about here.
Test. The last time I was here, I ran a simple case and lost. Now it's time to run a simple case and win. I'll tell you two things from the side of opening opposition. First, for the process of becoming an Übermensch that side government wants to put to you, the pursuit itself is a nigh impossible burden you impose on the average individual. But secondly, why a last man narrative is more preferable for the individual actualization of the problem. Before I go on, I want to deal with a contextualized push point from opening government. Because it's not about finding the meaning of life. I think both sides get the ability to say that there are different ways to find it. So it's not about subscribing to the emptiness of life versus finding a new meaning. It's about the process in which you find them. It's a pursuit of an Übermensch mentality, more proximate and better for individuals, rather than the process of finding the last man and finding comfort in her mentality. Which means the vast majority of side speech just doesn't land in the vast majority of the cases, because a lot of this contention is simply about why is it that finding meaning in life is important. We agree, but we don't think that Übermensch mentality is the way to go, and we think better processes are important. So first, why is the process of becoming an Übermensch nigh impossible for the average individual? And the premise here is simple. Gov condemns individuals to fruitless pursuits of actualization, leaving people at the end of the day feeling vastly inadequate. Which means, on your deathbed on Gov, it isn't the fact that we meant nothing in life and we didn't find our goals, it's that we never actually achieved the innate moral values that we set out to do. But even further than that, OG doesn't outline to you how those innate moral values are defined by the individual. Because what an Übermensch mentality tells you is that you have to go ahead and stand apart, be like the edgy guy that goes against societal grains and necessarily wants to step up and find your own moral compass. But we'll tell you multiple reasons why individualized versions of moral compass, absent of herd mentality, is incredibly a hard process for individuals to reach. Number one, it's incredibly difficult to define individual value outside communal structures and external forces. Because individuals' versions of current day morality are informed by external forces. The reason why you believe something is good or something is bad is informed by your religion, by your community, and by your friends and family. OG has no mechanism to prove how their versions of individuals are likely to find that versions of morality or reach that end outcome, which means I don't understand the process on their side. More often than not, we also likely push that individuals are not born with innate moral calculuses, which means they are unable to form responses to a vast majority of structures that exist within status quo, and it requires some level of herd mentality and some level of community to inform these kinds of processes. That means even if the process is something an individual owns, the ability to learn that process comes from the community in which an individual is born. For example, capitalism tells you that greed is a value. Absent of society, you are unable to properly distinguish whether that greed is something you want to opt into to succumb to capitalism or something you want to opt out of, because those choices are inherently informed by the community that you are a part of. Are your parents inherently telling you to be selfless? Is religion telling you to be selfish? All of these things are innately calculated. Absent of that, you are unable to form those innate calculuses to make good decisions. Secondly, oftentimes an Übermensch concept is incredibly hard for individuals to grasp. It is a transcendental framework that tells individuals they need to step out of current societal metrics. OG can't even tell me what this means to, in a debate where people are intellectual rather than the ability to do so. Which means that it's incredibly hard for an average individual to wrap their head around. But third, the calculus of life struggles is hard to overcome. Übermensch mentality tells individuals that they must be beyond life struggles, that despite life struggles, they find meaning on top of that or ascribe meaning to the struggles. The problem with this is human failings and disappointments are oftentimes inevitable to create the kinds of experiences that you go through. But secondly, the kind of mental and emotional maturity in order to overcome these struggles are incredibly lacking in an average individual. Look at conversations in your average group chat. Tell me these people have the average emotional and mental calculus to overcome the levels of struggles, and tell them that my values need to be transcendental to the kinds of things that life tells them. For example, I need to be transcendental my inability to go to the United Kingdom to study or to get a proper girlfriend. All these kinds of mental calculus means necessarily individuals cannot reach these things and therefore fall susceptible to an endless strife. The problem with this means that Übermensch mentality is incredibly high burden for individuals to wrap new moral compasses around, which is you result in the vast majority of people trying to pursue Übermensch mentality but never actually getting there. We provide you a better form of solvency. Before I get into why a last man is a better, more preferable for actualization. Haikal.
Make one characterization. Is it hard for people to understand what is meaning, or is it easy for people to understand meaning that it's easy for you to impose meaning to other people?
Okay, it's hard for individuals to self-internalize what meaning is. We tell you, when meaning is prescribed to you by a community or a society, it's very easy to opt in. It means you don't have to come to the internal calculus. You don't have to come to the internal calculus yourself. You have to opt into wider societal narratives and wider things people tells you, which leads to my second extension as to why necessarily it is much easier for you to opt into societal narratives and community building as part of herd mentality. The premise here is simple. It's a vastly lower barrier to access for the average individual. An average individual can conform and tell which societal structures. And we're not telling you to follow society on net. Multiple societal narratives exist simultaneously alongside each other, which means we can ask individuals to pick and choose the societal narrative that best resonates with them. What we are not telling you is to come up with your own new societal narrative as to why necessarily you deserve the kinds of benefits that you are and you're greater than the struggles that you are. Those kinds of narratives are hard for the average individual to quantify. These narratives are easy for individuals to pick and choose to decide what they want to subscribe to at any given time. And the problem with Übermensch mentality is it's relatively inflexible. Once you decided, if you can, on your mentality, you are unable to change that because you are now beholden to your own version of morality. The ability of societal narratives means that individuals are more flexible with the levels of morality that they do, able to pick and choose. What does this mean? First, the inevitability of life is tiring. Means that there's a constant barrage of this in your life. Eventually you have to accept that life is against you, and probably you'll never win unless you achieve immortality, and maybe you win. But most of the time you're unlikely to win. God tells you there's an innate need to overcome these struggles and disappointments by these individuals. That means the kinds of things they tell people on Gov is that every individual needs to rationalize their struggles with the immense emotional maturity and find out what those struggles mean and what I should learn for them. Sure, some people can do it, but the vast majority of individuals just simply cannot access these kinds of things. What are the greater guarantees of peace, security, and community they were able to use when it comes to community building? This is just simply to prove why communities are better when you collectively agree that everyone is collectively a last man. Even if there is no overarching meaning of the universe, there is collectivization of similar struggles. You similarly know that people are facing equal things. It's because the mentality of an Übermensch is highly isolating. They're telling you that you must be absent from the way that society perceives and your friends perceive. All these things mean that you're unable to form necessary communal structures in order to grow and learn from other individuals, because you can't deal with your struggles alone. That's what Gov tells you. The Übermensch mentality isn't being inspired by other people, it's being jealous that other people can come to these mental conclusions before you. That is inherently isolating in order to circumvent these kinds of things. Very simply to end this, the debate is about which team better proves your ability to cope with life. I prove to you the importance of a last man standing and the presence of community being important for individual perception of morality, but also individual growth in towards the future as a whole.
Thanks, Rico, for that speech. To further develop and try by here.
When Nietzsche proposed the death of God in justification of a pursuit of an Übermensch, he failed to recognize that God is not dead, and oftentimes individuals will look towards God as a solution to life problems. The first question I want to resolve is what exactly distinguishes the pursuit of an Übermensch over remaining as a last man open heart, because opening government gets the emotion wrong. The first thing I want to establish is that the pursuit of comfort and security as an individual is the same given A, the Infoslide, and B, the reconcilability of these natural conflicts. I.e., if it's something as small as you not being happy in your job, it's something you can reconcile directly by choosing a different job, which means this debate must operate on the pretext that we're discussing irreconcilable conflicts or clashes in your life, such as the inequality you face as an individual or the massive oppressive structures we are subjected to. Therefore, the discussion is then, how do we best overcome these human and material failings? Is it through the rejection of the herd mentality, as what opening government suggests, or is it through the community building that Wesley suggests is going to be a far better alternative, that is one that's more preferable for the majority of society? In response to opening government, I want to establish two things. Number one, the abstract nature of what an Übermensch means, of what an Übermensch is, means it is nearly impossible for you to ascertain or satisfy the needs of what being an Übermensch entails. Oftentimes, Übermensch have to be contrarian. They have to reject herd mentality as per the Infoslide and the actual philosophy Nietzsche proposed, which means if the majority of society says you ought to do one thing, like subscribe to religion, you choose to do the other because that's what being an Übermensch entails in the pursuit of a transcendental human form. But I want to flip opening government. They say the best meaning you derive in life is through processes like finding friends and debate tournaments. But the reason you derive those meanings is because you're conforming to the herd of a debate tournament. You're conforming to the friendships and connections you're establishing via these social activities, which is precisely what remaining as the last man allows you to do, because you collectively identify the fact that life is tiresome and you are collectivizing around that similar stagnation. Therefore, if Tanish wants to say you can choose the types of herds or moralities you want to opt into, the existence of those options for you to choose only exists on our side of the house when there are herds available for you to collectivize around. But secondly, the highest chance for you to be able to push back against perhaps these structures of oppression that opening government says are difficult for you to fight back is when you do so via community. The mechanism they suggest is just you realize these oppressive structures are oppressive and therefore you fight back. A, they don't actually explain how you're able to internally calculate the methods in which you're fighting back or whether that fight is going to be successful if the structures of oppression are as large as they suggest. But even if so, the ways in which you collectivize is around a herd. You collectivize around other racial minorities because you all collectively understand that you are not comfortable or at peace right now, which is why the last men rise up against the structures of oppression they have. Which means all of the analysis opening government suggests relies on the existence of a community that you want to conform into, that you want to use to your advantage, which is precisely what remaining as the last man does. The second question I want to ask then is particularly why herding and remaining passive to address the direct contention opening government is one that is still fine. Because they suggest on our side, we have to defend being passive and for some reason not having action against oppressive structures or the control over the challenges of your life. The premise or the preface I want to suggest is that you oftentimes cannot win against these structures of life being imposed upon you as what they want to suggest. If it's inequality, I don't know individually how you're going to massively overhaul systems. If it's things things like living in a terrible economy, I don't know why you're able to somehow uproot your life and become rich. If it's massive structures and systems in place, I don't know why an individual person is able to somehow rise up and feel derived enjoyment from that if they encounter failure. Which means, being passive, if you can guarantee peace and conformity, weighs above opening government insofar as it guarantees that even if you can't win over those structures, you win in life. The first thing I want to establish, and this is going to be naturally a historical lesson on the philosophy, is why historically the strongest herds have been religious or predicated on premises that are similar to what a religion entails. First reason, the historical power of religion necessarily means that it had the dominance and prominence to portray and influence the kinds of narratives necessary to allow individuals to collectivize. Churches had wealth. They oftentimes engaged in donations, even in the Middle Ages, for example, to establish a strong presence, which is what attracted individuals to collectivize around the church or around like early Muslim mosques, for example, in order to appeal to the masses. Secondly, they do not rely on actual material benefits to appeal to you. They only have to talk about things like morality, the ideas of God existing, the ideas of there being a hereafter you can strive towards, as opposed to pointing towards policy change or an actual material change in the economy for you to buy into what they're saying, which means the emotive rhetoric they're ascribing to you is one that lures you in and tells you that there is a light at the end of the tunnel in this meaningless life. Thirdly, it's often intersectional. So throughout the progression of time, people have been differing in terms of race and the social structures they have, but they're often united under the banner of religion because it's oftentimes viewed as an equalizer of all. You are equal in the eyes of God. Death is equal to all and fair to all, which is why all of the people in historical context have collectivized under the single name of wanting to be loyal to God. But fourthly, specifically to religion, it explains why the irreconcilable conflicts in your life have an answer. There are evil things that happen in your life because God has a plan as per the determinist narrative that Akasyah says is going to exist. It explains why even though you're suffering now, it is a test of God and a test of your loyalty that will be rewarded in the hereafter. It explains why some people are richer and more privileged, but you might be going through struggles. It explains why there are some things in life that are good or bad. It explains why the things that you might not think about logically as a human being have an answer, but you cannot materially derive on your own. Why is this necessarily important in the context of the round? If opening government agrees you can choose the morality that you want, we explain why it's formed around these religious ideals or similar communities that use similar techniques in order to forge religious values or moral values in their own way. But secondly, given the irreconcilable nature of these conflicts, it is good for you to be passive and opt into these things. It is good for you to find peace and solace in a meaningless world or in a world where you cannot solve your own conflicts and your own difficulties because you can at least derive some sense of satisfaction from the fact that you're following the word of God. Number one, it looks like the fact that the life and challenges you have are going to be unpredictable into the future, which means that you can still rely on the guarantee of God being there for you. Before I impact this, closing.
What is meaning?
Yes, but you derive that meaning through the herd mentality that you must reject as per the Infoslide, by the way, which I've explained can only exist under the remnants of the last man on our side of the house. But secondly, the never-ending cycle of life means you're constantly going to face challenges. You're going to constantly face weekends where you're going to sacrifice your time debating. You're going to face things like job loss and love loss and heartbreak, etc. Which means the fact that you can't necessarily predict the benefits and the ups and downs of your life means you default to the guarantee that a herd is going to give you. You know that your religious community is there, that the word of God is there, etc. This does two things. Number one, the collectivization around religious or similar communities means you can ascribe value to the hereafter or something spiritual that underlies the challenges you have in a manner that open government does not, because they are still reliant on material outcomes. You only derive meaning if you do well in a debate tournament, if you have good friends, but for the people that can't do that or don't have friends, they can still rely on the herds on our side of the house. But secondly, it also establishes one of the strongest presences you have in your life. The reason why you can have friends that make your life feel good at debate tournaments is because you conform to the herd that collectivizes around the central idea of debating. The fact that you can derive the meaning that opening government suggests is related to the fact that you all here agree on the fact that we somehow like spending our weekends debating and we conform to those narratives that they must reject on opening government.
Thanks, Speaker, for that speech. To open up the closing half, I invite Member of God. Here.
Hello. I wish there's a stand. I don't like holding a mic. And then... It's okay. That's fine. I'll take the from closing, maybe. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1.
Contrary to what Shireen has said, the creation of religion is actually the byproduct of people are actively rejecting the idea that life is meaningless because they found out that the truth is our life has meaning. The meaning is to actually to serve to our higher being, to be able to actually find the solace and to be able to be one and unite within reality is. Because the absolute peace is actually impossible for humans to actually encapsulate, especially in a very meaningful life. Humans are cursed with the intelligence that often forces us to think, to imagine, to feel unnecessary stuff and to understand unnecessary meaning in our life. The reason is simple, is because of why exactly that a lot of the things that we do are more often than not very hard for us to imagine, something that is very abstract. But even worse, when it comes to like imagining something that is void and empty, it makes it very, very impossible for us to understand because it's not something that you can grasp in the first place. Why this is very important? Because more often than not, we look into ways to actually fill up this void and emptiness in our life in order for us to understand it. Because all of this void and emptiness is the reason what makes us feel very uncomfortable in the first place, which is why our brain and actively our body is trying to answer the question as much as possible. That's why humans often question, what is the meaning of life? Is there any other higher being in the first place? Or what exactly the purpose or the memories that I have lost before? All of these questions are ruminating as the byproduct of our memories, of our intelligence that exists in the first place. And the empirical evidence why exactly this is true is because of our biological mechanism that actively try to complete the memories that has been missing. So for example, if you forget what happened last week, you try to fill up those memories by thinking of something that is very abstract because you do not understand what exactly void and emptiness, so you find ways to actually fill it up in the first place. Or for example, you do not know why exactly then we are exists in the first place, so that's why we try to create religion and believe that God exists to actually give us purpose and meaning, and so that way that we, after we die, we can actually go to heaven. Or for example, the creation of afterlife only exists because we do not understand what exactly the meaning of our existence and what would happen after we die, because we are curious of what exactly is going to happen next. All of these things prove to you as to why exactly then, in order for you to actually be able to achieve the inner peace that they want to achieve on that side of the house, it's simply impossible at the point where the life itself and the biological mechanism that exists within ourselves actively preventing us to actually be able to achieve this. Why that is very, very important? Because on that side of the house, insofar as you are not able to comprehend what exactly is going to happen in your life, even if like you are telling yourself that I am having a peace in my life, I'm content with my life, all of these things are just lies that you tell yourself every single day because you do not understand whether or not you actually believe it. But the problem here is that when you do not address the fact that you are lying yourself every single day, it puts yourself in a state of dread, because now humans are actively focusing on the dread, the existential threat that exists. We do not know why exactly why we're living, but now you are lying yourself, which added another layer of pain towards yourself because you do not believe that your life is actually even worse. This is the conflict of identity that often reduces your ability to actually understand your life better. What then is the conclusion to all of these things? Therefore, the meaning in life often becomes the prerequisite for you to be able to achieve inner peace. This is why monks in Bhutan only can achieve inner peace in their life when they are able to actually put meaning in the God that they believe in. They are able to actually pray and be able to actually do, I guess, the thing that, I don't know what it's called, I'm sorry. Okay, the point here is that then you are able to actually avoid all this threat in the first place then. The conclusion here is that on opposition, even if you feel like you are actually at inner peace, the truth is at the back of your mind, you are constantly still questioning the same thing every single day about why exactly am I still being alive, and that's why it's far worse, because now you put yourself in a worse pain and state. The second question I want to ask then, why exactly then the journey of finding meaning often allows you to fill in this gap? And this is where I'm going to de-engineer myself from opening government, because I want to know, it is not that the process of like finding meaning means that you feel happy suddenly, process of self. It's the fact that you are able to find you are able to identify the definition of what makes you you. So for example, I don't know what makes Haikal until I try to actually find things in my life. Things such as debating makes me Haikal. Things such as being a Muslim makes me Haikal. Things such as being a Malay makes me Haikal. All of these things only exist when you try to do all of these things, which allows you to feel the fullest version of you and give you the autonomy and the agency that allows you to have your identity. On that side of the house, you are nothing but a cow that actively eats grass every single day because you do not have any identity. You become a blob every single day because you do not know what makes you in the first place. But second, this is what OG do not explain, is the alternative of life. Because reality is, we often make mistakes in our life. We do not know whether or not we make the best decision for our life, but we find alternative in our life as well. So for example, maybe I actually go into I didn't go to other university or overseas university in the first place, but I go to UiTM and I found meaning in life UiTM. All of these things allows us to find alternative that allows us to feel enjoyment even if our life is very horrible. Because all says your life sucks. I agree, your life sucks, and that's why we find alternatives in ways, even if it sucks, because now we progress and we know what exactly to do in the first place. All of these things allow you to be actually better. But tell it, challenges actually make you enjoy your life better. Because the truth is, if all of you guys know the reason why winning a tournament is fun, it's not because winning of the tournament. It's the fact that you've been losing way too many times and you finally win the first tournament. This is important because that's why we do not feel the enjoyment after we win the second time, because we no longer feel the pain and challenges anymore. Which is why challenges are necessary for you to feel the enjoyment in the first place. That is why it's far better. Why then the impact here is very simple. It's very important. The truth is, the struggle in life allows you not only to make yourself feel happy about your life, but the struggle itself allows you to be able to improve the development of the society itself. The important thing to know on opposition is that they are relying on the idea that people are going to find peace and to find security in order for them to actually develop things such as math and science. The problem is that it often limits to the bare minimum, which is why people are unlikely to actually go beyond that. On our side of the house, we think about going to the space, we think about going to the depth of the society, we think about all of these things allows us to be able to actually find good things in our life, to be able to improve it. It only exists when you believe that your life is actually meaningful, and that's why you are more likely going to achieve this on our side, because you are no longer relying on the bare minimum in the first place. But secondly, it also allows people to find meaning even after they have achieved the bare minimum of their life. So that's why a lot of rich people become philanthropists, because they find meaning in their life and they give money towards people in the first place. That's how you are able to help other people as well. And I want to know, I don't know why exactly the opposition suggests that we must go against the herd mentality, because on reality is that a lot of people will still have cooperation on our side of the house because it allows them to be able to achieve their legacy in the first place. Then why exactly then it is important for you to be able to actually have control over your life in the first place? Because we are the victim of the birth lottery. We do not choose how we were born. We do not choose the structure that we are born in the first place, which allows us to be able to actually find meaning. Means that we are able to actually characterize what exactly the character we are, and that allows us to have autonomy and agency over our life, because we know that the gods are not actually meaningless and try to put us in a very painful existential threat. It gives us the meaning in the first place. That's why it's far, far better. But finally then, perhaps it's superficial, but who cares? I don't know even if you guys are real or you guys might be in my simulation, which is why it makes me feel important for me to know that the things that I feel is the most important and the most proximate to me. For all those reasons, it is clear CG.
Thanks, Speaker, for that speech. To open up closing half of the op, I invite the member of op here.
Testing. Before I start, I was told if you make it to the finals, you can thank people that matter to you. I would like to thank my mom. Yes, she was never there, but anyways. Okay, oh, I know. What a weird start. Done my speech. If you listen closely to what government say as a whole, largely derivative, that was what I was told to say, the entire government bench is basically just telling you that you must have meaning. I'm unsure as to why that meaning is Übermensch. I'm unsure as to why out of the plurality of ideas the opening government considered that there are many ways for you to find happiness, you must find one that tells you to actively embrace challenge, despite all the shortcomings that both OG and CG say that in an unequitable society, which we're going to contend later on, is unlikely that you can challenge the system. That constant struggle is what contributes towards the dread that CG wanted you to believe, because you're constantly lying to every single individual that you are special. In a world without inherent truth, your truth matters. It doesn't matter, and this is what CEO is going to do. We're going to posit to you that this is an individual fight. So as much as opening opposition sounds very fancy, talking about community building, talking about how you can find support, how you can start religions, I'm unsure as to why those things are true, and links are nebulous at best in how other people in a myriad of ideas will also believe in that system. What we think is that as an individual person, or as perhaps a small community, why the pursuit of the last man is a much more comforting and much more better alternative for you to live in. Let me quickly take out all the benches so far. Opening government just tells you that it must have a meaning. I'm unsure as to what the end goal is, because they say that there is a plurality of ideas out there, you just need to cherry pick one and be happy with it. But that ignores a big part of what the Infoslide clearly says. You must live in a world where you're constantly having the idea to reject herd mentality, meaning that you constantly tell other people that you are wrong, I'm right, and you have to constantly find a way to actively find new challenges, meaning that in their world, you will never be content if you actually win worlds, Tanish. You will now say, I want to win worlds, I want to win other majors, I want to beat David Africa's record because I want to win 5 majors. That will never happen in our world because we say that you probably are not David Africa. You won't win. And that's fine, because you have life outside of debates. And I think that is one that is more comforting and one that's highly more achievable. Don't believe they're rubbish about this whole couple thing, because that's not what the debate is. Their debate is just to find happiness. We think you can pursue happiness better in our world. But secondly, let me deal with CG. I'm just getting to you. Very apt that they talk about dependent monk and why they choose you. I agree, because Buddhism is about the rejection of the struggles of life, and that life is suffering and life is meaningless, which is why when you're born into this world, it's just an intermediary phase whereby you find comfort and solidarity by practicing mantra and accumulating dharma so that your karma is better in the next life. This means that in the world where you actively don't tell these individuals that you have to go up against what Buddha is telling you and to actively just say that life is shit, you will probably have a better life because you're always content with the fact that life will be unequitable. Which is why a group of people with only TV in 2003 is happy living in the mountains, and they're the happiest community in the world because they reject materialistic truths in their world. But also, the UMD example of Haikal is also our side, because you're telling me that a group of individuals who are unable to have the resources or not intellect, like resources to get into like better universities and fly overseas, now can find their own people who also fail to go overseas and are content with going under UITM. That is only possible in our side because we tell these people that you don't have to fight, you don't have to actively challenge the system and demand why you give me UITM. You are okay with UITM because you can find like-minded people out there and you can find comfort and solace with the group of people that are likely going to be agreeable to you. And I think that takes you up. I'll take you later. Okay, now let's talk about opening opposition, because it's a really big burden. Suddenly you got religion, suddenly you got community building. Maybe great if they can actually prove it. If you check through your notes, I don't think they actually prove. But what we're going to tell you that, assuming this debate is about an individual and a preference of values, why you're likely going to achieve things better on our side. Number one, let's talk about the pursuit of happiness. Life is challenging the minute you are born. It locks out against individuals who are perhaps disenfranchised by financially, mentally, or physically. Imagine telling a person who's financially and physically disabled that you can do something, the world is wrong against you. We agree, but I have no analysis from opening government or closing government thus far to tell you why you are the one. Unfortunately, the reality is that most of the time the fights that are won for disenfranchised groups are won by the people who are the most privileged within that particular minority. I.e., that unless opening government and closing government can tell me why you can be the single truth or tipping point towards changing the life for the entire community, I'm unsure as to why, using an average group that this debate is presumably based on, you are the one. We think that the constant affirming of telling individuals that they are special is cruel, because you're actively telling them to go out there and do something that you know full well, they're unlikely to achieve, or we are not to fight the good fight. Bro, Amrit has always told me back then, it is all about fighting the good fight. No bro, don't fight. Just embrace, okay? Life is bad, you're probably not going to win, and that's fine, because peace, comfort, and security is assuring. Peace, comfort, and security is happy, because you know that you're constantly insulated from threat, you know that there's less conflict, because you are affirmed by actively seeking out the herd, which is something that we have to defend, by the way, that other people also have it hard. You are not the one that's dealt a hard hand in life. Everyone has been dealt a hard hand in life, and it's okay, because you can constantly affirm yourself that you are not the problem, the other people are the problem. It is not my burden to solve the problem, unless they can tell me how they solve the problem, they lose. I'm going to open it, sorry.
So what's the problem with being edgy? Let Wesley be edgy, he's fine with losing people again. Yeah.
Wesley is not representative of the entire community. Wesley is not the only person that can actually do this. Wesley is very privileged to be able to miss his flight and still beg his mother to actually get another flight. The majority of people haven't even got a flight. And I think that you are privileged to assume that this debate is about people who otherwise have resources. Then it's just a matter of picking for them. It probably has no impact on them. But this debate is about people who otherwise do not have a choice and they have to pick one or the other. Why? Übermensch. Secondly, let's talk about self-blame and victimization. In the world that you, according to Infoslide again, where you have to constantly and actively challenge yourself and find a truth or forge your own meaning, any sort of failure on your part is not blame on society, but blame on you. It is because you didn't fight enough. It is because there's inaction. If you manage to achieve something, but you stop, you are not the true embodiment of Übermensch, because you stopped fighting the good fight. You are not actively seeking out new challenges to fight. You are not actively trying to win against better opponents. So we think that you are never content with life, and the challenges in a world that is already unequal to begin with is one that is depressing, is one that's unlikely going to lead you to find solace and the happiness that opening government and closing government told you about. But the third is a creation of in-groups and out-groups. If in the world that opening government and closing government must defend that there's no inherent truth, you are basically telling other people not just finding happiness, you must find happiness at the expense, at the condition of proving that other people's form of happiness is imposed on you, is wrong. Because you have to constantly forge your own meaning, because otherwise the meaning of the world is one that's disenfranchised against you. We think that opening opposition is perhaps right, that there are existing moral codes out there. You seek those moral codes because there are already so many out there. The burden that you impose on the individual to constantly seek out new meaning is one that's depressing. All teams assume rationality for these individuals. All you need is just one individual who believes that one race is better than the other, and that is the meaning of truth to start World War II. I think to the mass majority of people is inaccessible. Don't tell them to fight against the herd, embrace herd. Thank you.
Thanks, Miko, for that speech. To wrap up the golf bench, I invite you up with fear.
Nobody on government bench at any point of this debate actually tells you what peace looks like. Does it look like a person being content? Or does it look like someone sitting in their room feeling nothing? Or does it look like a person literally just being at peace with themselves, or probably sitting under a peach tree like Oogway in Kung Fu Panda? Nobody actually tells us what peace looks like, and therefore nobody on nobody on opposition bench is able to prove to us how exactly they attain peace on their side of the house, or why exactly this is something that is necessarily accessible on their side of the house. The first thing that I'll contend, or the first clash that I'll resolve, is the clash on accessibility to the pursuit on either side. What exactly do we get from OG? OG pushes largely legacy because of the fact that the only way you're able to derive meaning is at the point where you challenge values. You're better able to access things like legacy. You're better able to exercise your agency in leaving something in the world, or leaving something behind for people to remember you for. What exactly does CG argue to you? CG argues for meaning that is independent of necessarily leaving behind a legacy. We access meaning through the ability for this individual to think for themselves. We access meaning from the ability for this individual to say, I don't agree with you, and here's reasons why I don't agree with you. But the second version of this, and I think something that, and this is something that is even more important to highlight, is that it probably looks like them not being a hard opposition, or them not being a total opposition, like opposition likes to paint to you. Because opposition tells you that you're unlikely to be satisfied because you're going to constantly challenge herd mentality. I posit that it's most likely going to look like you having apprehension in the first instance of interacting with somebody. You're not necessarily going to be agreeable to all of their values instantly, which means that you're more likely going to be able to challenge the value and the value of this specific the value of the value in your life. But the problem with OG in terms of legacy then is that OG's frame sets a higher barrier of access to achieve meaning out of deciding what your values look like in your life, or achieving meaning from how exactly those values play out in your life. I.e., your meaning that you derive is now comparable to other legacies, and the reason why OG's Mac is comparable to other legacies, whereas your values under CG are not comparable, is because a legacy is something that is tangible. For example, if you leave behind a team that is able to win WSDC, you're probably going to have a better legacy than a coach that is going to be able to lead the team to victory in VC Cup that is only run in UITM. That means that at the point where you have a tangible impact, it's much more comparable. We prove that you derive meaning on our side of the house, regardless whether you get something that is tangible or not. Secondly, the reason why this is the case on OG is because their pursuit is focused on the outcome rather than the meaningfulness of the pursuit in itself. It's only in CG that you access happiness from the pursuit alone, because you're more likely to accept the meaning of life is inherent to the pursuit of that meaning in the first place, which means that regardless what meaning you do achieve at the end of the day, or what value you achieve at the end of the day, you're going to be much more satisfied, and the barrier to having that contentment, or the barrier of access to happiness is much lower on our side of the house, and is much more proximate and achievable. The work that you do to help the underprivileged, to train a winning debate team, for example, is going to matter to you regardless of the outcome. Sure.
When Haikal asked what makes Haikal Haikal, he said the UITM community, as Wesley correctly proves. What makes Haikal without it?
Haikal? Thirdly, then, Tanish tells you that the individual shapes their own values, and the process in doing so without telling you how these standards are going to be formed. CG engages further in proving why now, structurally, when you have the drive to form your own values, or at the point where these individuals are the main character in their story, those values are going to be derived from the pursuit, regardless of what outcome they achieve, regardless how many people, for example, they have to opt in their lives, because of the fact that the pursuit in itself, the challenging, the idea that you challenge other ideas in society is already something that gives you meaning. Let's look at how exactly OO comes up under this clash of the accessibility to pursuit. If the end goal on OO is to achieve peace, they don't prove how exactly this individual is going to be protected in the pursuit of achieving that peace, which inherently locks individuals on their side of the house out from achieving peace in the first place. Because like I said, they don't actually tell you what peace looks like. They don't tell you that, for example, peace means that you're able to sleep in a comfortable bed at the end of the day. Or does peace look like you sitting in the middle of a war, being oblivious to everything that's happening around you just because you don't place value on, for example, deciding whether the war is something that is good or bad. But importantly, the more you're unable to access peace and face structural barriers that keep you from that peace, the more this individual on their side of the house becomes nihilistic, as opposed to remaining as the last man in its purest form. Because on their side of the house, they had to prove how exactly they achieved peace one way or another, whether it's through the outcome or through the pursuit in itself. The problem then is that they lock individuals into a depressive state, or at best, for example, on their side of the house, they're just going to sit and do nothing. They're going to be complacent. At least when we have self-determination, the management of goals are going to be better controlled by the individual, which means that regardless of the size of the value, for example, or regardless of the access to that value in itself, this individual will still be able to tailor those things according to themselves. What exactly do we then get from CG? CG explains why exactly individuals are unlikely to achieve meaning, for example, or they're CG says, we posit that access to accountability is the prerequisite to peace or meaning on both sides. CO posits that at the point where you have meaning, or you place meaning on, for example, the pursuit, individuals are unlikely going to be able to coalesce, or they're unlikely to be able to, unable to grow in society, or unable to be able to work with each other. We posit that the main character syndrome is something that is important in order to flip Patrick's analysis. If everybody's the main character, you're likely to get better determination and access, which means that individuals don't necessarily have to come from the highest points of privilege in society. They just need the idea that they're the main character. They're going to find one way or another to achieve their benefits at the end of the day. Secondly, he also posits that you are going to blame other people. On our side of the house, you can blame other people, but what is more likely is that you're likelier to focus on your own job or your own pursuit because of the fact that you're the main character and you come first. Lastly then, OO also posits the idea of the idea that there's going to be fruitless values on our side of the house. Firstly, we posit that societal values are the result of a group of people in society internalizing and accessing values individually, and also reconvening to decide on what ought to be, imposed and adhered to. The heart manifests on op, assuming people don't internalize values and like independent of society, they're likely to be unable to challenge, they're likely unable to challenge harmful values. Secondly, they're also unable to access solace on their side of the house, which means the church argument by Shireen falls. For all those reasons, CG.
Thanks, Speaker, for that speech. To wrap the off bench up and this grand finals overall, I invite the off whip here.
Since Patrick was thanking his mom, I'd like to thank DVD and Podium for getting me here today. I'm very proud. Okay. Alright. This debate is intellectually challenging. Only one team will make it past, 3 teams will lose. One of us will feel happy, 3 of us will feel sad. If I was the last man standing, I'd choose to walk out of this debate, follow the herd, go home, save my sanity. But Patrick won't let me do that, and Gav won't let me do that. We can't stand with Gav. 2 things I'm going to do in this debate. Firstly, explain to you why CG can't simply come up with their new extensions and why it wasn't sufficient. Secondly, why we take over OO in terms of our framing, and ultimately are best able to fulfill the idea of the last man standing, with at its very core achieving the peace and security that we desire. Firstly, on to CG, right? CG posits this idea to you that you must have identity and meaning to be able to exist. Otherwise, you're simply unable to do so. And for those reasons, there's always going to be something in the back of your mind lingering there like a rash, A couple of reasons as to why this is untrue. I mean, simply in their POI themselves acknowledge this, right? I mean, they say that Haikal debates and he's Malay and he's Muslim and he's part of the UITF community, and that makes him Haikal. But they themselves admit to POI that Haikal is Haikal because he's Haikal. I am Divvesh because Divvesh is Divvesh. I think, therefore I exist. We posit to you that these are sufficient reasons enough to want to be existing and sufficient reasons enough to be happy and healthy. This on its own brings me peace and security. The fact that I exist on its own and I potentially bring joy to my family and potentially bring joy to the people that I love and around me is more than enough for me as an individual. I do not have to go beyond that point like Haikal to be able to achieve any form of happiness. But yeah, I'm here. Okay. And then, moving on to this, another core idea that runs throughout the Gov bench, but something that we think can't stand. This idea that you must always pursue something to be able to achieve a form of happiness, whereby insofar as you don't pursue that, there will always be this lingering feeling, etc. I think firstly I also want to point out the fact that opposition, Gov points out, Gov makes the argument very conveniently here, right? That insofar as you pursue things, even if you're unable to succeed in the long run, there is still something that you benefit from that. I'm going to explain to you why that's just really very convenient framing and can't go far, right? I think it's important to consider the opportunity cost of certain actions, right? Coming here to debate at Cato is an incredible time investment. You lose time spent potentially with your family, money lost traveling, the energy and sleep that you potentially would get otherwise. And the time that you could have spent stagnating and just looking and enjoying nature out there. But that on its own is not enough, right? The second idea I want to posit to you, the very convenient framing that, Übermensch doesn't just mean chillax, being okay with losing a couple of tournaments and being okay and going home and then striving to continue onwards. It is this idea here that, your parents push onto you, my child is incredibly special, you're my special boy, you can do anything you want. That's exactly what Übermensch really is, right? They insist to you that there is always something that you can potentially achieve insofar as you try hard enough. It is like this idea of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, but those bootstraps broke a long time ago. There is simply nowhere to pull yourself up to. I think insofar as that's the case, you will continuously try to pursue the same ideas over and over again. You will try to pursue those same goals over and over again. You probably don't get very far. I'll take that point later. I think This then ends up becoming incredibly tiresome. It becomes a massive time investment. You're no longer able to be fine as an individual. But before I move on to and as to why I don't think OO can really take over us in this debate, I just want to point out the fact that the vast majority of Patrick's extensions went largely unresponded to. We reframed the debate uniquely in CO to posit to you that the idea of peace and security does not require on having to find a massive community or forming these individual communities or trying to create something that is symmetric or if not parallel to what organized religion looks like. The very idea of just being existing and just being with your family and being around the people that you love on its very own is enough for peace and security. Because what exactly does opposition OO tell you in this debate, right? They tell you that ultimately we're able to collectivize as an institution and as a group of people whom are all incredibly stagnating. And they say that through this collectivization, you can then strive for things that are, you can strive for some deeper meaning, or you can either strive to just be okay with things. But the problem with this then is that they put upon themselves an increased burden. That is now, they must build this community from the scratch. This then becomes incredibly difficult because where is the peace and security in doing so? Not only is it just hard to find people who are like-minded and to be able to build an infrastructure from the top to bottom, but it always will be contrarians on the other side. Just like government themselves mentioned, Übermensch is about people going up against each other, it's about believing that they themselves are right. This then just ends up becoming like a Bollywood movie. There's 1,000 heroes and we are unclear who the villain then ends up being, you know? It's hard to do so and so. I think for those reasons, OO simply cannot take over us, purely because of the fact that at purest form, you're unable to achieve that peace and security that we truly strive for. And I'll take that point from Oji.
Tedo is hard. In your work, nobody will register for Tedo. Why is that?
I think we're perfectly fine with nobody going to Tedo at all. The competition doesn't have to exist. Money doesn't have to be spent. Time doesn't have to be spent. People can be happy in their house without the additional stress of Tedo. We think that's completely fine if competition doesn't exist to any form, because that just re-falls into the cycle of capitalism and wanting to go and trying to progress and pull ourselves up further and further and further. We think that simply can't go very far. And I think that there's this like slight OO contradiction as well that I want to point out, right? They reframe it as, we want to chill out by ourselves and so on, and that there is like, there's no intrinsic burden in forming these communities. But like we point out, there is an additional burden that you put upon yourself insofar as you want to build these communities. I mean, Patrick himself mentions that the pursuit of happiness is an incredibly long process, and it's something that is incredibly tiring on the government side of the house. This is something they never really acknowledge, because they posit to you that happiness can be found at multiple stages of the pursuit of happiness because of the fact that you can achieve marginal forms of happiness from these small losses and these small wins. But we posit to you that that's completely untrue. These marginal losses are just marginal forms of sadness that you accumulate as you go. It also means that there's a significant opportunity cost in not being able to accumulate all the happiness you currently have as you are born and as you already do exist. Insofar as that is the case, government cannot get far in the long term in being able to suggest that they're able to keep ourselves happy. At the end of the day, right, it then comes down to who is best able to achieve happiness and peace and security on our side of the house. I mean, Patrick reframes the debate brilliantly. He tells us why OO simply can't take this debate because of the way in which they choose to reframe finding community and the way in which they choose to find happiness and the peace and security. That simply puts an increased burden upon these individuals. It was never sufficient. On the government side of the house, they posit to you that you must find this happiness through marginal losses throughout the process. They never deal with the idea that plenty of people will fall throughout the process. They never deal with the idea that they're always going to be contrary against the contrary that is you yourself. We then become unclear who is right and who is wrong. You blur the line too far. Just quit, go home, have fun.
Alright, thanks Vika for that speech and all speakers for their speeches. This will mark the end of the grand final for Tedo.